Angry Birds is without a doubt one of the most iconic video game franchises of all time, not only in video games, but in other types of media too, such as cartoons, movies, and even toys. Angry Birds may seem like a dominant force in the industry, but it really does have an interesting development and origin story, from transforming a dying Rovio into a powerful force in the video game industry. However, like in my last video, the development and origin story of Angry Birds hasn't really been talked about in depth on YouTube. So, in episode 2 of From Concept to Release, we're going to see how Angry Birds not only saved Rovio, but managed to become one of the most recognisable video game franchises of all time. So today, prepare your slingshots, as I'm going to cover Angry Birds, from concept to release. The story of Angry Birds begins around November 2003. A new game studio from Finland was just formed known as Relude Oy, by three Helsinki University of Technology students, Nicholas Head, Jarno Vakavine, and Kim Dickerit. Previously, all three had competed in a mobile game development competition at the Assembly Demo Party, which was sponsored by Nokia and Hewlett-Packard. The three students developed a game known as King of the Cabbage World, which actually won the competition, with the victory leading them to create the studio. The game though was sold to Somia, and renamed Mole War, which actually became one of the first real-time multiplayer games for mobile. Throughout the studio's early years, they developed and co-developed multiple games, mostly for mobile, even having partnerships with EA and Namco on certain games, although the studio let other companies publish most of their games. Eventually, the company in 2005 changed its name to Rovio Mobile, as the studio mostly developed mobile games. Rovio's games were successful and even won some rewards, but with success comes a cost, and throughout the early years, Rovio began to struggle financially, even leading Rovio close to bankruptcy in 2009. And at that point, Rovio only had enough money left to develop one game, which could pretty much be Rovio's last chance at developing a successful game. Mikael Head, who recently became the chief executive of Rovio, and his cousin Nicholas Head, a founding member of the company, made the decision to completely reboot the studio. The company's future looked very uncertain at this point, only having around 12 employees compared to a peak of 50 employees after many forced layoffs in order to save money. Rovio's games mostly at this point were developed for larger studios such as EA, Namco, and Real Networks, with Rovio having only developed around 50 games at this point. Rovio itself wanted to develop multiple games by themselves. However, they only had enough resources to make one, and as I said before, the future of the company seemed very uncertain, with their fate either being bankruptcy or being acquired by a bigger studio, meaning that if Rovio never took a risk and had a go at developing one last game, Angry Birds would have never existed. Changes needed to be made. They decided to take the risk and shift Rovio's main focus from developing games for large publishers and develop one last game by themselves for the App Store, and the Nokia lineup phones too, for their 50-second title. They needed to make a game which would apply to everyone and would stand out in the App Store. Nicholas and Mikael held a meeting to discuss new ideas, and this is where Jacko Laislo comes in, most notably known for being the creator of Angry Birds. Jacko had previously been at Rovio as a game designer since 2005. He showed the two higher-ups a screenshot he attempted to pitch 2 months before, which showed a cartoony flock of birds without the ability to fly trudging along the ground towards a moving pile of colourful blocks. The original concept was called Depressed Birds, with some early designs of the flock. You can clearly see the early designs of red and the blues. The background was also similar to the final game's background. The pigs were also not in the game at this point. From the look of this concept, it originally intended you to tap on the screen, which made the birds jump at the coloured blocks. This concept art you're looking at right now was the pitch Jacko showed to the higher-ups at Rovio back in early 2009. The two instantly saw so much potential in Jacko's concept, they decided to utilise it for their next game. Rovio now had a plan, however, the company still needed saving. The initial budget for the game was around $25,000, and considering this game could decide Rovio's future, it had to be successful. They were so desperate for funds, one of the founders' uncles, presumably Nikel's, took a second mortgage out on their parents' house to help fund the game. The game had to be successful. At this point, presumably around early May 2009, the development of the game began. Nicholas and Mikael led the development of the game, with Jacko being the lead designer. One notable developer was the investor backer. The game's development went into full swing, and designs for the birds were starting to be finalised. Throughout development, the birds underwent many different designs and mechanics changes. This early prototype screenshot from Jacko's original kit shows the original design for Red, originally being called Georgia, although not having an original name upon release, as well as RPG-styled stats for each bird, although this was scrapped early on. Rovio also at this point was looking for a main gameplay style to utilise in the game. Rovio eventually saw a popular Flash game known as Crush the Castle, which required knocking down buildings with a catapult to levels. Although you could say Rovio somewhat stole Crush the Castle's main gameplay style, they massively changed it and somewhat improved it, placing the catapult with a slingshot, even though the catapult was actually originally going to be implemented instead of a slingshot. The developers saw this potential gameplay mechanic to have lots of potential, and instantly implemented it into the game. The physics environment for the game was Box 2D. This physics engine was used in most Slingshot Angry Birds games like Angry Birds 2. In that game, they switched the engine to Unity. Coming back to the designs, the developers quickly noticed that having different coloured birds getting slingshotted into buildings was initially quite boring, and didn't have very high engagement levels with players. The whole depressed bird's name was also not very marketable, so the developers soon started looking for a new potential name. And the developers soon realized that to answer all their problems was just to find a main goal of story for the game. Jacko started designing an enemy for the game, and soon settled on green pigs as the main enemy, because of how they were easy to draw, and how the swine flu epidemic somewhat involved pigs around 2009. So this also influenced the decision, as it would technically get more attention from people because of how pigs were in the media at that point. After the enemies were now ready, the story of the game was being prepared, being that the pigs one day came with a plot to steal the birds' eggs, as they wanted to eat them, which led the birds to follow the pigs to try and retrieve their eggs, by knocking down all of their bases. Hence, because of how the pigs stole the birds' eggs, this also led the birds to becoming angry instead of depressed, leading to the name becoming Angry Birds. The developers soon began designing the iconic levels, with different materials such as wood, glass and stone being used to construct the pigs' fortresses. The different materials encouraged the developers to add unique abilities, with the blues being able to split into three moves, Chuck being able to break through wood fast, and Bomb and Matilda being able to blast through stone, which can be seen in the final game. Also, upon release, many of you probably know that the birds didn't actually have names at this point, with many people referring to them as Red Bird or Blue Bird, although they got their names sometime in the future update. It seems throughout development, the birds as well as the pigs went through many design changes, although it seems the in-game designs were finalised. Small collectible eggs which led players to bonus levels known as the golden eggs were added as something for the players to collect whilst completing levels. There's one thing about the development of Angry Birds which I absolutely can't miss, is the iconic soundtrack, with the unmistakable theme song. It was composed by Ali Pulkin, and compared to the theme song used in the final game, the actual song itself had a small part at the beginning cut from the final theme. Although there's not much information regarding Angry Birds' development in depth, we can see that the game was created around 2005 or 2006, with development of the game lasting around 8 months, beginning around early 2009. Around December 2009, after 8 months of development and many changes, the game was around ready for release. Rovio knew the potential of the game had to be a hit, as if it flopped, Rovio's fate would almost certainly be bankruptcy. Angry Birds had to succeed. On December 1st, 2009, Rovio's YouTube channel, or the Angry Birds YouTube channel as it's known today, released the first trailer for the game, showing off some gameplay which is pretty much the final game, with a few minor differences. As far as we know, the trailer performed pretty average, however, did build some hype for the game within Rovio's fanbase. In terms of publishing, Angry Birds was published by EA Shalingo, EA's mobile game division, as Rovio at this point mainly got other developers to publish their games. The game, excluding future updates, exceeded its $25,000 budget, costing around €100,000 to develop, around £88,000 or just under $120,000. When December 11th came around, Angry Birds was officially released onto the App Store and for Nokia devices for around $1, with Rovio's future being even more uncertain at this point due to the amount of money the game costed to make. And did the game perform well? Well, not exactly. In fact, the game at first completely flopped. Yes, you heard me right. Angry Birds at launch didn't perform very well, getting little downloads, around 30,000, and was returning nowhere near the amount of success it needed for Rovio to turn away from bankruptcy. At this point, most developers would just move on and develop a new game, but with Rovio, they still saw something unique about Angry Birds. In fact, Nicholas showed the